Today on Inside Utah Politics, Congressman Blake Moore joins us on the show. He's running for re-election. Hear what he's sharing about his vision for Utah's future. In a unanimous ruling, the Supreme Court protected access to a widely used abortion drug. Find out why the fight over reproductive rights is far from over.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. I'm Brian McElhatton. Let's go inside Utah politics now. And this week, ABC4's Matt Fonts sat down with Republican Representative Blake Moore. He's running for re-election for Utah's first congressional district seat. Hear what Moore had to say about topics like Utah's economy, Social Security, and protecting our public lands.
What it means for you, for the state as a whole, you being, from what we learned, the first vice chair of the Republican conference and the first Utahn ever elected to party leadership in Congress. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, being in the leadership is, it's two things, right? Like you mentioned, this is the first time it's really happened in Utah, and that's key because it just gives an elevated voice for Utah. Yeah. But it's probably more beneficial for our federal government to have a little bit more of Utah injected there. I mean, we do things right here in a lot of ways with regards to the way we run our budgets, the way we have a strong economy, even the way Utah's one of the most philanthropic states in the nation too. And so we do things well here, and they've had good outcomes, and we need more of that injected into our federal government. And so I'm hopeful that this leadership role can continue to grow into more influence to make sure that our federal government operates a little bit more like Utah.
So you talked a little bit about the economy there. Let's talk a little bit more about that. What does making the economy work better for Utahns look like to you?
To making sure that there's upward mobility. That's ultimately what it all comes down to. That's what, as we talk about generation to generation, I need to have more opportunities than my parents did, and my kids need to have more opportunities than I did. And the thing that's threatening that the most is that, and you realize next year, we will spend more to service our federal debt than we will on defense alone. And defense has always been one of the top three major budget lines. Social Security, Medicare, and defense in the last decade or so have been kind of top, but our interest is growing too. And so that's going to squeeze out and crowd out some of the other investments that we should be making with federal revenue. And so that's my big concern. But making it so there's upward mobility, new job opportunities, and growth in the economy is key.
So this might go a little bit on kind of what you just touched on there with Social Security. I know you hold a seat on the Social Security subcommittee. That's correct?
Yes.
What is your preferred outcome for privatization?
Privatization? Okay, so my preferred outcome for Social Security in general is to be around for those that are investing in it now. My kids to be, they're forced into putting into FICA taxes, and if they're putting in that investment, they need to make sure that benefit is there for them the way that it is supposed to be designed. The biggest threats to it is that we're coming into a demographic shift. We've been, since 2008, been into a significant demographic shift where we're having more and more folks in the retirement phase of this program than we are inputs into the workforce. And that ratio, if it continues in that direction, will deplete our resources by 2033. And then immediately at that point, there'll be a 24% cut across the board. So privatization is something that we should have been doing a long time ago. If we would have engaged in what George W. Bush wanted to do, instead of Democrats blocking that effort back in let's say 2003, if we would have been investing more of our trust fund into a naturally growing market, typically just mutual funds that are pretty common for every single one of us, if we would have just been engaging in that, we could have grown that trust fund to better serve the population that's going to need it. But we were myopic then, and by we, Democrats just refused to get to engage on this. And they say, oh, well, what if this? What if this? Well, the only thing we do know is if you don't grow at a certain rate, then you will definitely be depleting, and that's just a myopic view. And so I wish we would have taken that approach then. So can we rectify a little bit of that now? I believe so, and I think we have to. But you have to look at all aspects, from caps to age to, you call it privatization. I say just naturally growing these elements. Look at an endowment for one of these Ivy League schools. They've been engaging in more stronger interest-bearing accounts. Why can't we do that with more responsibly do that with federal dollars that go into FICA and things like that. So we just can't be so laser focused on what mistakes that we made in the past and look to the future.
Okay, some good points there. I want to talk about social media a little bit too, because I really feel like over the past year or so, regulations have been a big topic of conversation, and Utah has actually been one of many states leading the way on these regulations, especially with kids. That's been a big topic of conversation as well. What are your thoughts on regulating big tech and where we go with that whole realm of things?
So uniquely to our own personal experience, my wife and I have 4 boys, 11 and under. I had just gotten a text message from a friend of mine, completely random, out of the blue. This individual's never recommended anything to me before. And he's like, you have to read this book. So I downloaded it, got it, started listening to it. At the same time, my wife had the same recommendations, The Anxious Generation.
Okay. That's the name of the book?
The name of the book.
Okay.
Then I had someone meet with me about all the tech that is existing and how the ownership of that could actually be better used if we're able to internalize it and make that our own. But kind of a different subject, but back on the point of our youth, like they're experiencing an enormous amount of anxiety and detrimental effects, and you can draw it directly to that. So parents need to be engaged. I support making it so, and the concept of this book is to make sure that our kids aren't addicted to this stuff so early in age. We have to be willing to kind of step in and regulate and identify what is causing some of these major problems that our youth are facing. So it's it's obviously something that's evolving, but we need to make sure that our youth are protected. So
would you like to see down the road a total ban, or you would just kind of want to see more regulations when they go onto these sites? Maybe things are censored and they're only allowed this amount of time or things like that. So
the specifics of it are tough to nail down, like in this type of setting. I will say though that 2 things that I think we need to be focused on. One is making sure that the kids have to go through some consent process before they can own a social media account. And I think there's age limits that we could do and be very thoughtful about whether it's can't have it under 13 or 16 or what that is. I don't know that specific number. I know that our governor has been really sincere about working on it, and I support the efforts that he's doing. The second thing is I think that's creating so much, I don't know, consternation or just real issues in our society right now is there's no transparency on these things. Yeah. And everybody just signs up in a cowardly way, and they don't have their name associated with it.
TikTok's been a huge topic of conversation.
I mean, put your name on your profile, communicate what you want, but don't hide behind some fake name and some account like that. That's the part that I can't really get behind, and it's creating so much toxicity in our communities. You would never speak to a person face to face like that, but when you hide behind some random handle, you can say whatever you want and think you're pretty cool, but you're actually just being a big coward.
Public lands, obviously that's a big topic of conversation just across Utah. People wanting to conserve them while also, building things that we need and infrastructure and things like that. How can Utah and the federal government work better together in managing these lands and coming to a general agreement on certain things?
Yes, so Utah and the federal government have got to figure this out. It's an easy soundbite to say I'm going to return all the federal lands to Utah ownership, right? Yeah. We would manage them better when we do that. That may not be the reality right now. So we need to make sure that we're engaging in these things called shared stewardship agreements. It's a pretty technical term. It's something that the governor's team and like the Department of Interior get into the weeds on. But we've seen some really good success kind of come from that. And I think that, Utah has been a player and someone that's been sincere about how they go about managing our lands, and the federal government needs to do a better job of looking at our outcomes and saying, okay, look, how are they handling their state parks versus how are we handling the national parks, and what can we be taking from their understanding? This is Utah area, this is Utah landscapes. No one appreciates them more than Utahns. There's the overreach that happens, but there's just a non-strategic thought process that goes into the Biden administration's approach to this, just saying, oh, let's pick 2030 for some arbitrary date that we have to have this accomplished by. Well, there's no actual way to get there, but it sounds great on a headline.
Right.
And that's where Utahns are in the details of actually determining what is best, what can we accomplish, and what outcomes can we create.
Okay, some big conversations there. We'll have more with our sit down with Representative Blake Moore later on in the show. But first, coming up, the Supreme Court strikes down a Trump-era ban on bump stocks. Hear what top lawmakers are saying about the new ruling now. Well, there's big news this week from the U.S. Supreme Court. The High Court has struck down a Trump-era ban on bump stocks. Our Washington correspondent, Rashad Hudson, shares what this latest move means.
The Supreme Court ruled the Trump administration did not follow federal law when it reversed course from previous administrations to ban bump stocks. Bump stocks are legal again in the U.S.
It's just a device, something that you add on just to have fun with.
Friday, the Supreme Court struck down a ban on bump stocks put in place by former President Donald Trump. The ban came after a gunman used bump stocks, a rapid-fire gun accessory, to shoot at a crowd during a music festival in Las Vegas, killing nearly 60 people. Michael Cargill sued the government over the ban and is now celebrating the ruling.
The Supreme Court answered that superbly, exactly the way I want them to answer it.
Tennessee Republican Congressman Tim Burchett and Alabama Republican Congressman Dale Strong say the court has spoken.
It's the Second Amendment, and I stand by it.
The Supreme Court has ruled. Let's move on with it.
Maryland Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin slammed the court's ruling.
The idea that anybody can have any arsenal they want in order to overthrow the government is ridiculous.
Vice President Kamala Harris says the Biden administration will continue to work to reduce gun violence.
What the court did today is really rolling back what otherwise is important progress to be made.
President Biden is now calling on Congress to act. He wants Congress to ban bump stocks and assault weapons. Reporting in Washington, Rashad Hudson, back to you.
In a victory for abortion rights advocates, the Supreme Court rejected a legal challenge to the abortion pill mifepristone. The unanimous ruling preserves access to the widely used medication for now. Washington correspondent Jesse Tenur explains.
Both sides say this is still far from over, since the ruling was not about the safety of the medication, but whether abortion opponents had the legal right to sue. All 9 U.S. Supreme Court justices rejected a lawsuit seeking to restrict access to the abortion pill mifepristone. But both sides of the debate say that's not the final word.
We'll continue to advocate for women's health and seek to restore common sense safeguards for abortion drugs.
Erin Hawley with the Alliance for Defending Freedom represented the plaintiffs. She argued against FDA regulations that allow easy access to the drug, calling it dangerous.
We're hopeful that the FDA will be held to account for putting politics above women's health.
The Supreme Court decision, for now, allows people to still easily access mifepristone, which is used in about 2/3 of all abortions.
This is not a cause for celebration, because the reality is certain things are still not going to change.
Vice President Kamala Harris argues too many women still lack access to abortions.
2/3 of women of reproductive age in America live in a state with a Trump abortion ban.
Abortion is banned at all stages of pregnancy in 14 states, and after about 6 weeks of pregnancy in 3 others. Republicans, like Florida Congressman Byron Donalds, say the federal government should stay out of it.
This is an issue that states are going to make decisions on.
But the Senate's top Democrat, Leader Chuck Schumer, argues Republicans in Congress are still working to roll back access.
This shouldn't be a decision women are forced to fear year after year.
And Schumer has been bringing reproductive rights legislation to the Senate floor for votes, largely to put Republicans on the record in an election year. And the latest effort involving federal protections for IVF treatments failed yesterday. In Washington, I'm Jesse Tenor.
And when we come back here on Inside Utah Politics, abortion, wildfires, and air quality. Our in-depth conversation with Congressman Blake Moore continues right after this.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Welcome back to Inside Utah Politics. We continue our conversation now with Republican Representative Blake Moore. He's running for re-election for Utah's 1st Congressional District. Our Matt Fonts has that interview.
You look at air quality in Utah, and that's something that everybody can get behind. We want better air quality. Utah's growth has happened significantly over the last 30 years, but our air quality some of the parts per million of toxins that exist, they've actually remained steady. They haven't grown with each other. And so we're finding ways to do a good job and take care of these situations and environmental concerns, better than I think a big just sweeping government mandate can. And like take grazing, for example. Like the federal government wants to limit grazing. Well, grazing is one of the best things we can do to protect against wildfires. Yeah. So if the federal government really wants to limit what takes place with wildfires, you can't just make some, claim that you can't have, no more grazing or limit what can be done with regards to grazing. Like embrace it and learn that, over decades we've been able to do it well and keep wildfires under control.
So how do you reassure the people who think that there's just a lot of bad going on environmentally, in our lands and things like that? How do we let them know, hey, things are staying steady, or this is what's being done, to kind of ease tensions a little bit?
You just have to build those relationships, and it's tough because when you have sort of a top-down approach within the Biden administration right now, there isn't a lot of thought that goes into some of the decisions that are being made. But you just have to keep pushing back on it, find ways to engage. I mean, we had Secretary Vilsack here a little while ago meeting with the governor. Again, go back to that shared stewardship agreement. There has been really positive things that have been done. I have a bill that will encourage other states to enter into some of those same agreements. Makes it easier for them to enter into those agreements. And by all means, they can take a look at the outcomes we've had in Utah and learn from them.
Okay. Heading into the 2024 election, where, we're just months away from it at this point, another heated topic of debate is obviously abortion. That's something that's been talked about not only here in Utah, but across the nation. How do you think Utah plays a role in some of the key deciding factors of what happens, doesn't happen, not only here, but across the nation?
Right. So Utah, with the court ruling with Dobbs, this pushed a lot of these decision-making back to the states, and Utah is going to go through its own process to come to the right place that they feel is best representative of the residents and the citizens of Utah. Utah can be a really good example to other states on what limitations are done, how are we caring for these folks, these individuals, these families, these women that are going through really tough decisions, and hopefully we bear out when you look at it on the other end. After this legislative period goes, because it really hasn't been a part of the state's purview for a long time while Roe was in place, and now that we're in a post-Roe world, how do we take care of those folks that are going through these tough decisions and make sure that we are limiting as many abortions as possible across our country? And that's what needs to be the focus. It doesn't need to be this fight. It doesn't need to be this constant tension. We need to figure out, and New York's going to have different laws than Utah, but overall, we as a nation should be able to say we want as few abortions as humanly possible. Avoid unwanted pregnancies, have the responsibility to recognize, okay, there's real laws in place now in various places. We should be more responsible as a society, and also limit the number of abortions as much as possible across the country.
Do you have any opinion or take on people who, okay, they don't agree in one state of the laws that are in place there, say they're a lot stricter on abortions, but this is something that they want to do and commit to, and they're going to these other states to get them done? What is your thoughts on that?
Right, I'm not in the business of that type of individuals stopping somebody from going to one state to another. I just want Utah to show the nation that, like everything else we do, we can show how reasonable we are and how thoughtful, and how much we care about the things that we should be caring about. And the sanctity of life is something that we should absolutely be caring about a lot. And I don't want Utah to shine here in another situation. It's not just the amazing economy that we have and the beautiful landscapes and the amazing skiing and all that stuff that we have. I mean, we have a way to show how to properly govern and hopefully share that with our other states. It's how our democracy, it's how our constitutional republic was supposed to be established. We're supposed to have all these different states going through different trials and experiments, and then we should be able to learn from it. We need to do that more across the board in every policy decision, from education to what we're talking about now.
Last question for you here, kind of general, just encompassing of it all. A lot of people look at Congress right now and just everything going on in Washington, and they see a lot of talk, but a lot of people could argue that action is not being taken. It's just a lot of hearsay and going back and forth. What do you think needs to change for either A, you guys working together, or B, for people to see that more is being done than what they're just led on to?
Right. There's a lot of things we do in Congress we deserve a low approval rating. Now, each individual member of that district may actually get a high approval rating. Because I would experience that in my district where we have really strong approval, and we're feeling really good about going into the next election, and we've had a lot of strong outcomes. So hopefully the folks in my district, my constituents, look and say, okay, I think Blake's doing the right thing in this, and this. But yeah, I'm definitely frustrated at Congress as a whole, and I get that. That's what you get when you have 435 people from 435 districts from various levels, various spectrum of political thought, right? So you're going to have dysfunction in Congress. It's designed that way. What I would say for folks to look at is in President Biden's first 2 years in office, and part of this was Republicans' fault for not winning elections, but the balance of power shifted dramatically. In 2017, you had Republicans in the White House, House, and Senate. In 2021, you had Democrats in the White House, House, and Senate controlling it, right? Very narrow margins, but still you had that. At that moment, when you have that scenario in Washington, you can pass any budget-related bill once a year that you want. And what Democrats did in President Biden's first month is passed a $2 trillion bill. It's called American Rescue Plan. It was supposed to be about COVID, and it had virtually nothing to do about COVID. It was a wish list of things that had existed for many, many years. And they passed it, and 3 months later, we saw some of the worst inflation our nation has ever seen. So I can assure you that if Americans were to step back and look and say, you know what, maybe I don't want Congress to do so much. Maybe I don't want them to pass a $2 trillion bill because the political environment was right for that party at that moment. I want more checks and balances, so they can't. I would look, we have basically obliterated, President Biden initiated $5 trillion of new spending that hadn't existed in the normal appropriations process, $5 trillion above and beyond. But no wonder we saw so much inflation, right? And Republicans took back the House. We have a narrow majority, but we took back the House and we created it so you couldn't just pass a massive budget-related bill like President Biden did in his first and second years of office. We've completely eliminated that opportunity, and we have then also dramatically reduced what type of new government spending can be introduced. And I hope that Americans could actually see that and say, okay, that's what I want. I want there to be some breaks back there, because when you just layer it on, what comes of it? Well, you're taxed heavily, because inflation is nothing more than just an extra tax that's placed on you, and we can't have that anymore. That's what's been a killer for families across this country.
You think there's any hope for Americans that want to see just a middle ground between people working together up in Washington, D.C., where things can get done mutually on both sides?
Well, I think they want to see is an example that we did with our Great Salt Lake bill in my first term. I don't care if you're the most conservative person thought or the most liberal.
Yeah.
You put me and a representative named Jared Huffman from Northern California together. We both have a terminal lake in our district, and we recognize that those can't dry up. The negative effects of that happening, it's going to hit a conservative no different than it's going to hit a liberal if we've got a bunch of toxins and arsenic and depleting snowpack, right? And so what Americans want is they don't care if I'm going to be my conservative self and if that individual is going to be his liberal self. They want to know that we can actually dialogue and communicate together.
Well, that wraps up our interview with Congressman Moore. Stay with us. More Inside Utah Politics coming up right after this. All right, that does it for this edition of Inside Utah Politics. And don't forget, if you have any local political stories you'd like to see, make sure to reach out to us. You can email InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow along with me on social media, on X @BrianReports, and on Instagram. Just search for Brian McElhatton, all right? Thanks so much for being with us, everybody. We'll see you right back here next week.